All the hustling, all the work, from working the corner for Breeze and Kanan, it brought us here. For two knuckleheads that grew up like us, Tommy, to make it in the city, man, ain't no small shit.
Now, it has been a while since we've spoken about anything other than Book 2 Ghost, but some of you who may follow me on Twitter may have noticed I am rewatching OG Power. And watching Power over again, even though I've watched it a number of times, you always kind of notice something different or have a different kind of outlook and perspective to certain scenarios and certain situations. Maybe because we now have this whole Power universe, which gives certain characters a lot more depth. Maybe because we're just getting a little older and wiser, and as we grow, we always see certain situations in a different manner. Or maybe because we now know at some point in the future, we are going to see Power origins and the beginning of Ghost and Tommy's journey from Power. And that's going to be the main focus for the rest of this breakdown. We're going to look at a couple of things I picked up in my rewatch of Power so far, and generally what I'm expecting and hoping to see during the early courses of Power Origins.
Remember time he had that little African albino motherfucker he brought around back in the day? He thought he found another white boy like him in the hood. Remember the look on Tommy's face when little man kept calling us? Remember that look? Yeah, you didn't know whether to join in or slap the fuck out the boy. Oh, Tommy. Yeah, man. Tommy's always looking for somebody to take care of him. Yeah, that was your job.
Now, when we were first introduced to these three characters on Power, of course, Kanan was in prison, which was thanks to Ghost and Tasha. However, you could tell there was a lot of history here, especially when Kanan walked into the penthouse after he was released in season 2. I said, look at all these fake smiles. It's like when you're in a room full of cousins and aunties who you don't necessarily get along with or trust, but you're having to put on a fake smile for the sake of it. I think we've all been in that position, but there was a lot of history here. Ghost and Tommy used to work on the corners for Breeze and Kanan. Breeze was then taken out by both Ghost and Tommy, and then Kanan was sent to prison, which was set up by Ghost and Tasha. At the time, even Tommy didn't know, which kind of sticks with a similar theme we've seen across Power, where Ghost never really used to tell Tommy what the full plan was. It dates all the way back to when they were teenagers or in their early 20s. So, there was a lot of history, betrayal, no doubt manipulation, which we are going to come to in just a moment. But there was also a lot of love and trust between these characters. In the early stages of Power, we saw Tommy and Ghost's organization facing a bit of a crisis, and who did Ghost turn to in a time of need? It was Kanan Stark. Despite Ghost being the one who put him in jail, he still had a lot of respect and trust when it came to Kanan. But why? It's because he was his former mentor. In Tommy's words, there wasn't a great idea that Ghost didn't steal from Kanan, and clearly Kanan was still very well respected. Kanan definitely played the long game while he was in prison, knowing that Ghost was the one who was behind his setup. He helped Ghost with the Trenton beef and probably so much more. In hindsight, of course, Ghost definitely should have listened to Tasha, at least when it came to Kanan. So, when we do see Kanan eventually meeting Tommy and Ghost, which I personally think may even happen in the closing moments of raising Kanan to transition us into Power Origins, maybe even after an end credit scene like we saw with Tariq at the end of Ghost Season 4. But when Kanan eventually does meet both, we have to see him mentoring both of them. When Kanan brings in Tommy and Ghost, he's working for Breeze, and we need to see them build this relationship and brotherhood, because clearly there was once a lot of love and a lot of trust between the three. We need to see how they grew up, Kanan looking after Ghost after Curtis St. Patrick's death, and them really building a strong connection and bond, which makes us think, how and where did it all go wrong? Just like we now see Jukebox and Kanan's relationship in raising Kanan, especially in the early years, we're all asking, where did it all go wrong in terms of their relationship? I think it's pretty common sense. We're going to be asking something very similar, especially when it comes to Ghost, Tommy, and Kanan. Let's also not forget who Kanan's mother was, what she's done, and how she's a master manipulator, which would have naturally passed down to Kanan Stark. In fact, we definitely know it does because of the character we saw on Power. So, even though we are going to see them build this bond, build this brotherhood, even though we are going to see Kanan mentoring both Tommy and Ghost, we're also going to see this level of manipulation. There are going to be a lot of layers to this relationship and story, and as I mentioned before, it is an important story that they definitely have to get right, because of what we saw during the early stages of Power. But let's move on to the next point, Tommy being bullied in the streets.
But Jamie has always shown up for you. You ever tell you about the time these two boys jumped him? We lived in a black neighborhood. Called them all kinds of names for being white. James found those boys. Gave them what they had coming to them. They never bothered Tommy again. No one did, as a matter of fact.
Now this is a topic I've raised before. Just like how Kanan isn't the Kanan we saw from Power, the Ghost and Tommy that we get introduced to in Power Origins most likely won't be the Ghost and Tommy that we're accustomed to seeing in Power and also Force. We'll definitely see similar traits, that's for sure, but in terms of exactly who they were, they're definitely going to have a lot of growing up to do, and they'll only become the characters that we saw on Power through various setbacks, heartbreaks, and also experiences. The Tommy that we saw on Power was really ice cold, ruthless, ambitious. He gave zero fucks. He had no remorse, took no shit, wasn't afraid to lay down the law, and so much more. However, if we peel back the layers of Tommy's character, which they definitely have done with his relationship with Kay in Power, and also recently in Force in terms of revealing more of his backstory, we do kind of get the idea of how Tommy had a real tough upbringing, how he was lied to in regards to his father Tony Teresi, having a junkie of a mom, how Tommy had a broken childhood where he had to fend for himself. And we do know Tommy is in and around Queens at this moment in time. They did leave a little Easter egg in 303, but the Tommy that we get introduced to in Power Origins, I wouldn't be surprised if he was introduced as a really vulnerable character, just like when we met Kanan. We could actually argue that Jukebox was more streetwise, tougher, and stronger. With Tommy, even though we're accustomed to seeing him kill, be ruthless, showing no fear, they do have to give us a backstory as to how he became that character, and it is definitely going to be a nice steady build-up, a patient build-up. You can tell Sasha Penn takes a lot of care when it comes to raising Kanan, and he's definitely all about telling a story at the right pace, ignoring the outside noise about Breeze, Tommy, and Ghost. And with Power Origins, in terms of both Tommy and Ghost characters, with Sasha Penn spearheading the series, it's definitely going to be no different. But with that being said, with Ghost coming to the rescue for Tommy when he's being bullied in the streets, I guess that's what sparks this brotherhood between them. And so that brings me on to the next topic of Ghost, and how they tease Ghost having a dual identity even when he was younger.
Man, Ghost, he was your boy, that kid. Always with his head in the motherfucking book. Vicious with a piece, though. Y'all fell out?
He was the reason why I went inside.
Now, I'm not quite here yet in terms of my rewatch of Power. At this moment in time, I am coming to the end of Season 2, but we do have to talk about what Jukebox once said about Ghost.
I ain't afraid of no fucking body.
Then why would you send your son in there against a man you raised up to be a gangster? You knew better.
Now, this goes back around to Kanan mentoring Ghost and in essence, shaping the character that we saw on Power. Of course, Ghost at some point will start to look at Kanan, his particular decisions, his leadership, his vision, and he's gonna think, that's not what I want for my future. We know Kanan as a character is street through and through. He wasn't built to be a CEO or be in the boardroom with the likes of Simon Stern.
So you're gonna take that test, you're gonna get into that school downtown, you're gonna go to college, and you're gonna become a CEO or some shit. Okay, you about to live a life that people around here only dream about.
Even though Rock definitely had a different vision for him, even though he was clearly very intelligent, that's not what Kanan wanted for his future. On the other hand, Ghost, he was different. He wanted to be a businessman, he wanted to be bigger and different. Just like Duke said, he was always someone who had his head in his books, but also vicious with a piece. So, when it comes to Ghost living this double life and him having this dual identity, which we saw throughout Power in a number of ways, I think one which stood out for me was in Season 1, Episode 1, when he came home and walked by this mirror which Corny Kemp said was very deliberate, to basically show how many versions of Ghost there probably will be during the series of Power, and also how many layers there are to his character. But with Ghost living this dual identity and double life, with what Duke said about Ghost, I think we can make an argument where Ghost will be, in essence, living a double life even in his younger days. On one hand, he'll have his head in his books, but once he steps out the library or he steps away from school, he's going to be vicious with a piece. So, even though early on I argued these aren't going to be the same characters we saw on Power, we are definitely going to see a few similar traits. And with Ghost, him living this double life and dual identity, I definitely do think that will be one of them. What Jukebox said was a younger version of what we saw with Ghost and what he did with Miguel in the cellar of Club Truth, being vicious with a piece, but then switching it over to being smart, back in his Tom Ford suit and the owner of a successful club. That's one example of many across Power, with Ghost kind of living this double life. And that's something we're definitely going to have to keep in mind when it comes to Ghost's character, even in his younger days, this double life and dual identity. Now, when it comes to the character of Ghost, I just mentioned how there are going to be so many layers to his character, just like when we see Kanan in terms of his relationship with Rock, his uncles, Jukebox, Bamus, D-Wiz, Ronnie, and no doubt others in season 4 and 5. How we've seen Kanan learn and be influenced by so many different characters, I'm sure we're definitely going to see something very similar with Ghost in terms of his family. However, in terms of his backstory, we don't actually know too much. They never really explored too much or spoke about too much in Power. But I'm sure in the writer's room they are definitely going to be brainstorming a few different ideas, that's for sure. And they probably will be looking at his conversation with Uncle Gabe in 610.
That I tried to tell him not to talk to the police. That those kids were bad news.
So we learned about how his father was killed after he went to the cops when Uncle Gabe pleaded with him to just pay those kids. And around 2 years ago, in my Unsolved Power Mystery series, I did run a theory of how Kanan may have potentially been behind some kind of manipulation, which is a theory I am going to stick to, knowing the character of Kanan and who his mother was, what she was capable of, how she used every single tool at her disposal to try and get control over Kanan. Why wouldn't Kanan do the same when it came to Ghost? So, Curtis St. Patrick, Ghost's backstory and relationships that he had with his father and a few others, and this manipulation that we touched on before, is definitely something we should be looking forward to seeing and seeing what really happened during Curtis St. Patrick's death. Now, last but not least, I do guess we have to touch on the subject of the one and only Breeze, a character who I genuinely don't actually like speaking about too much these days, because he has been teased before, and we still haven't been introduced to him. When he appears, I guess he appears, or when he's finally announced, that's when I'll get excited that Breeze is finally here. But because he's a character that's very important to not just Kanan's come up, but also Ghost and Tommy's, he is going to be very integral to the overall story in Origins. Let's not forget, he is the one who gave a young James a nickname of Ghost. He's the one who's ultimately going to give Kanan this opportunity. He's the one who they're all going to learn from. In Ghost's words, he loved Breeze like a brother. And so how I spoke about the love that Kanan, Tommy, and Ghost had for each other in the early chapter of this breakdown, we have to add Breeze into the mix as well. There are also two different versions to Breeze's death. There's one we heard from Kanan, but then there's also the one we heard from Tommy. Maybe Kanan didn't even know Tommy helped Ghost. Maybe Kanan manipulated Ghost into killing Breeze, but he didn't know that Ghost asked Tommy for help. All of these questions do eventually have to be answered in Origins, but again, in terms of Breeze, when we see him, that's when I think it's time to bring up the topic of Breeze again. Or, when we get concrete, confirmed information, that's the time to get excited, which in my opinion will be at the back end of Raising Kanan. I do think that's the most opportunistic time to bring in Breeze to really hype up Power Origins. But that's a breakdown of some thoughts, theories of Power Origins alongside my rewatch of OG Power. Of course, there are a lot more details and a lot more story, and I have posted a few more thoughts on my Twitter. But when we get closer to Power Origins, and when we see Raising Kanan Season 4 on our screens, I'm sure we're definitely going to touch on some of these subjects again. But definitely let me know your thoughts down below in the comment section, and as always, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.